Back in the 4th century BC, there was this Roman dictator named Marcus Furius Camillus. And a lot of what we know about him is really kind of lost to history. But what we do know is that there was this one instance where he was able to mediate a dispute among two different factions in the Senate. And because of that, he probably staved off a civil war in the Roman Republic. And when this happened, because dictators are self-promoters by nature, he wanted to remember this feat that he performed and probably also brand himself a little bit out there to the people. And so he built a temple, a gigantic temple, to the goddess Harmonia on the western end of the Roman Forum. Harmonia, as the name might imply, is the goddess of harmony and balance. And so it's not hard to figure out his angle with the construction of this great monument. And this temple was used for 800 years for worship of the goddess Harmonia until the 4th century in the Common Era, when by that time Roman emperors were no longer pagan worshipers themselves, but were transitioning the Roman Empire into the worship of Christianity. And so it was no longer fashionable to be a pagan worshiper. You went to church, you didn't go to these temples, and it largely was abandoned for 100 or more years. And likely what happened, although we don't know for sure, is there was an earthquake in Rome, and because this temple was generally neglected, it collapsed in the earthquake, and no one ever really made any effort to rebuild it. This is maybe around the year 500 in the Common Era. And so when the temple collapsed, what you had left was this big pile of rubble on the western end of Rome. And fast forward 1,000 more years, and by this point, there are no more Roman emperors ruling over Rome. The Pope is more or less the king of Rome, and he is building St. Peter's Basilica. Anyone been to St. Peter's in Rome? It's this gigantic church, and you stand in the courtyard of this gigantic structure that completely surrounds you on every side. Some of it likely built from this temple and others that from the old Roman Empire and Republic that had collapsed. And so you have all this building material sort of just laying around town that you can build a church with. And some of the temple of Harmonia we think was used in the building of St. Peter's. But there was still a lot of rubble. And here's where, I know I'm moving pretty fast here, but here's where I start to get a little bit interested in this story. Because fast forward 400 years more, and cross the Atlantic from Rome to Washington, D.C., and in 1854 in Washington, D.C., they were building another monument to another sort of godlike figure in our own national our own civic sort of religion. A gleaming obelisk was going up in the center of Washington, D.C. to honor the greatest of the founders, George Washington, the Washington Monument. And for a while, the construction of the Washington Monument was something of a disaster, just a rolling calamity going along step by step. It was proposed in the 1830s. And it took 15 years for a site to be selected and years more for money to be raised, and there still wasn't enough money to finish this. It was supposed to be a 555-foot tall monument. By the late 1850s, they had only built 100 feet of it. The people who lived in town described it as looking like an old chimney from a burnt-out house sitting in the middle of Washington. And money was not coming in very fast, so construction was continuing at a crawl. And finally, a doctor in Alabama had this idea. If we couldn't find the money, then why not have different entities sponsor particular stones and send them to Washington to go into the monument? So a call went out to all the states, all the cities, civic organizations, and the like, to sponsor a stone that would be sent and added to the Washington Monument. They could even inscribe it however they wanted, and donations started coming in. There was a stone that was donated by each state in the Union at that time. One came from the Ladies' Association of Lowell, Massachusetts. One came from the R. Norris and Sons Railroad. And indeed, Pope Pius himself, Pope Pius IX, in Rome, the longest-serving pope of them all, sent a stone. And when he wanted to send a stone, he went, or he didn't go, he was a pope, he had people for this. He went to this rubble pile where the Temple of Harmonia had once stood, and they found a nice big piece of limestone and had it carved into nice proportions to be sent across the Atlantic, and even had it inscribed, Rome to America, and off it went to Washington. Came over by ship, and when it got here, it was very quickly placed under guard, because this may have been a 2,000-year-old stone from a temple only known in antiquity, but it was also very controversial. Because by the late 1850s, America was a country divided, not just over slavery and by the lines of North and South. It was also divided more and more every day by religion. For a while in that era, a very large percentage of the population just knew that the Catholic Church was going to be the downfall of the Republic. Immigrants were coming in more and more every day from Catholic places like Ireland and Germany. And so in this nation founded on religious freedom, there were societies and political parties springing up because people felt that the nation had gone entirely too far in extending religious freedom to Catholics. So when the giant hunk of limestone arrived, inscribed Rome to America, given by a pope, a group of agitators first demanded that the gift be rejected, sent back across the Atlantic. We don't want their stone. And when the Washington Monument Committee rejected this idea, they said, okay, fine, we want our own stone, and we'll inscribe it with a message. We want it put right on top of the Rome to America stone so that future generations know that there were good Americans born in America who opposed the grievous outrage of having a slab of stone from a pope in Washington's monument. And when both ideas were rejected, a group of 9 men took matters into their own hands and under the cover of night snuck into the site where the stone was being kept. They knew it was controversial. There was a guard there and a guard dog. This is my least favorite part of the story. They poisoned the dog. And I know, right? What kind of people are we talking about here? But also, they tied up the guard, carried the stone out. It weighed multiple tons, loaded it onto a keel boat at the edge of the Potomac, rowed it out to the middle of the river, and pushed it overboard into the river, proving their point. And more years went by. And about 30 years to be exact, and it's the late 1880s. And fortunately, this idea of sending in stones with all these different etchings on them, can you imagine what Washington Monument would have looked like with a bunch of 19th century commercials written all over the stone? Like, that just wouldn't have had the same kind of effect of majesty for 8th graders on their 8th grade trip to Washington. But they had finished the monument finally after the Civil War. And right around the time it was getting ready to open, a swimmer who was swimming in the Potomac River reported that she had found a pink-colored limestone in the Potomac. And even though it was polished very smooth from 30 years of water flow, she had been able to make out the letters, Rome to America. So they pulled it out. The monument was built by this point, but there were a lot of monuments going up in Washington in those days. They had this big, nice piece of stone. And then 2 days later, it was stolen again. We don't know where it is. Lost to history. And then the Washington Monument, not long after that, was opened with over 36,000 pieces of stone holding it up 555 feet. And none of them from the Pope. Symbol of American freedom, To some, a little bit of a middle finger going up to bigots and tyrants, however you want to see it. And it stood there for the last century and a half as the city around it changed, as the country that it was at the center of changed. In 1960, when that country elected a Catholic president for the first time, and has since elected one more, and it'll continue to stand, at least for a while. Sometimes the greatest and most beautiful gifts really end up getting ruined by the knuckleheads. Like that weather-worn stone intended for the Washington Monument from an ancient classic temple. Our text tells us about a beautiful gift. And this one also given with a beautiful intent. This one coming from a vulnerable person in a vulnerable place. Mary anoints Jesus with a very expensive, costly perfume, and no wonder, because we read this in John chapter 12. Anybody know what happens in John chapter 11, what Jesus does in John chapter 11 for Mary and Martha? He resurrects their brother, brings him back to life. They knew he was very sick, and Jesus in that chapter seems to be taking his sweet time in getting to Bethany to help out, and he doesn't make it in time. He's several days late. Lazarus is dead, but Jesus resurrects him. There's even a dinner being thrown for Jesus now, a celebration. And maybe Mary is just very wrapped up in the celebration, and she looks over and she sees her brother who had been in a tomb, and Jesus called him out. And he should be cold and stiff, laying in the ground. But he's not. He's sitting and laughing. This is my imagination, but this is the way I see it. He is sitting and laughing and sharing bad jokes with people about how he looks great because he's recently had some downtime. And you don't have to give that a pity laugh. That's okay. I think Mary is overcome with gratitude. I really do. Because she lavishes it on Jesus. She takes nard, which is this expensive ointment, perfume, that it comes from India. It's from a long way away. It would have been something of a great delicacy. And she takes a pint of it. Ever been trapped on an airplane with someone who, it just seems like they took a perfume bath before they got on the plane? It fills the whole room when she does this beautiful act. Because she's grateful. And at least one person there is not having any of it. So Judas, like a mob of Washingtonians taking a beautiful and rare gift and throwing it in the river, Judas decides, I will rain on this parade. And he complains. And where she is grateful, I think Judas has grown a little bit entitled. Because he spent all this time in the disciples, in the Jesus Club, being one of the insiders with him. And as far as I can tell, Mary's sort of an insider too. She is well acquainted with Jesus, but she also just lost something, and she sees what she could have lost. And this leads them to very different places. One with an attitude of gratitude in Mary's case, and one a sense of deep entitlement in Judas. And so Mary bathes Jesus in this beautiful gesture. A gesture, by the way, this is one of the stories, one of very few, that's in all four Gospels. It's told differently in some important details in the four, but there are not that many stories that all four Gospel writers tell. This is one of them. And if it's that important, how do I make gratitude into something that's a part of my life? How do we do that as part of our lives, both as individuals and shared? Especially right now, because it's the Lenten season and we're supposed to be getting our hearts and our souls and spirits ready for Easter. And in addition to prayer and fasting and eating special meals together and things like that, I think maybe the magic ingredient in Lent that has to carry all those traditions is gratitude. Maybe the big ingredient that we need is gratitude that makes us a little bit more Mary and a little less Judas. Now, we don't naturally drift towards gratitude. This, I think, is kind of curious because gratitude feels good, doesn't it? when we feel happy and blessed and grateful for what we have and the ways that we experience life. Gratitude feels good, but we don't naturally get our way to gratitude very easily. It's easier to go the Judas route toward entitlement. And I was trying to think of why this happens, and I think I have a simple analogy that helps explain this. And to do this, I need to ask you all a question. Let me poll the congregation, and I'm just telling you now, we're in church. You have to tell the truth on this one, okay? Got to tell the truth. But raise your hands if you think you're an above average driver. All the choir? Most of the people out here? What an incredible coincidence. All of the best drivers in all of Albuquerque coming to sit church at St. John's today. It's what a marvelous coincidence. I mean, statistically, what are the odds that this would even happen? It's amazing how that happens because, I know I'm a better than average driver. I have proof because all these speeding tickets I get, they're just proof that I can go much faster than everybody else in a safe way. Gotten a few in the last couple of months just to show that I still have it. And so this entitlement creeps into our mindset. I'm one of the good drivers. And of course, have you driven around Albuquerque? There are bad drivers too. They go to other churches. Don't worry about them. But of course, all of us think we're above average like that. That's entitlement. Because then we can come and complain about that person who cut us off or that person who was riding our tail. And those kind of drivers, that's not us until it is. And if it's not that, by the way, there are 10,000 different ways we experience this in 21st century life. How many of you go to your fridge when you're feeling hungry? Think for a minute about what a miracle a refrigerator is. You have in your house a gigantic chest that keeps your food yummy and fresh for you. And it's full of food. Your forebears 100, 200 years ago, it would have boggled their minds that we had this blessing in technology. What do you do when you go to the fridge, though? You open it up, and what is there? There's nothing to eat. We deserve something more than what's in there. That's entitlement. I was at dinner a few weeks ago with a couple friends of mine who I grew up with long ago, and we were sort of catching up, and I was at their house, and they were saying, we're about to move this house. It's just way too small. We are cramped in it. We are full up to the gills in this house, the two of us. And as I was sitting eating, it occurred to me that these friends of mine, they have in their house an entire room where you press a button and they can bring their entire car into the house with them when they want to. Not even their car is left out in the cold. Now, I know, most of us have garages. I have a garage. But I just want you to realize all of the different ways that we experience blessing. And those are the material ways, and in some ways, those are the easiest. But it goes so much more, it goes so much deeper than just the material things that we have. In fact, a lot of the people I know who have very little in life experience gratitude much more freely than a lot of the people I know who have a lot. Community, church, our spirituality. How do we not go through life day by day in a Mary-like attitude, knowing our blessing? We get into this mode of thinking that we are having to do without when we are bathed in blessing. This is how we become Mary or Judas. It starts with gratitude or a lack of it, that sense of entitlement, of deservingness for things that God gives us, and we take it for granted. And that's why Mary lavishes this extraordinary gift, this generous act on Jesus, and Judas can only see what he missed out on. I imagine that's why he's embezzling the funds too, because he knows he deserves more. I wish I could find my own way to experience gratitude every day of my life. A lot of times we can get to a place of gratitude, but day to day we get into the slog and we forget, not just when it's the Lenten season, but every day. I wish that my disposition, my default was an attitude of gratitude and thankfulness, so that my whole life could be like a monument to gratitude for grace and mercy in Jesus. And one of the people that I always think about, you don't know him, but let me tell you a little bit about him. I had a person in my very first congregation. His name was Dub, and he was just a walking, talking example of gratitude. But I got to introduce you to him a little bit first. Dub was a character. He was kind of an older guy, but he had the mind of a young con artist. He was just brilliant. He was getting to that age where you can't drive anymore. And it was very apparent that he just didn't have the reaction times or the ability to safely drive his car. And in fact, I knew that a day was coming when his children were going to take his car keys from him. And I knew that was going to be a really bad day for everybody. Imagine my surprise when the following Sunday comes around and Dub comes pulling up in a car, gets out, is ready for church. I walk up to him, I was like, "Hey, Dub, how's it going?" He's like, "Oh, I'm doing great. I'm just doing great." I was like, I know that your kids took your car. What are you doing here at church? Now, Dub had been a used car salesman in his working years. And he said, "Well, I'm just really lucky because there's a used car lot right next to my retirement home. I just went over and bought another car." I was like, "Great, that's exactly what should have happened." But I tell you that really just to introduce you to him. When I think about gratitude with Dub, I think about the one of the very last times I saw him, and by this time he was in the hospital and he wasn't going to come out. And the last time that I went and visited him, he was just a picture of someone whose health was failing. His heart was failing and infections were coming up all over the place. Tubes were going in and out of his body all over the place. His skin just had that kind of sickly look to it. And the last time I saw him, I walked in the door and I said hello and how are you doing? Which is such a silly thing to ask somebody when you walk in. But he said, "I am so lucky. I am doing great." And I didn't say this, but I wanted to say, "I don't know that you are doing so great, Dub. You don't look so good." But what he said next was, "I didn't think I was going to wake up when I went to sleep last night. And so I've cheated death today. I think I might do it again tomorrow." And he did for a couple more days. That's gratitude. Do you feel entitled to tomorrow? Getting to breathe air and walk around? Some people do not have that luxury today. That's gratitude. In another place, Jesus said, "To whomever much is given, much will be required." In the Gospel of Luke, he says that. And when Jesus said that, do you know who he's talking about or talking to when he says this? He's not talking to elite people. He's not talking to the equivalents of Kennedys or Trumps or Buffetts or Gateses when he says, "To whom much is given, much will be required." He's talking to everyday people. He's talking to people like us. And that means that we've all been given so much blessing. Lauren Winter, she writes on this passage and she says, so often we fail to recognize that gratitude, really what it is, it's a mind shift. That's all it takes. From thinking that God wants our happy chatter and that God is deeply, deeply interested in our opinions and all the people that we hate, to feeling a quiet, deep gratitude. And so that brings me back to Mary and Judas on that day in Bethany. And Mary doesn't hesitate. Mary doesn't hold back. She gives this precious gift, not in a calculating way, but out of love and thankfulness for what Jesus had already done for her. And what she does there is we start to see this sense about how we can approach lots of things in our lives and in the world, not just the big amazing things, not just the resurrection moments. She pours it out in a way that feels reckless, to those watching, but it feels absolutely right for her. Judas is more of a cynic. He knows he deserves more in his crummy little heart, but we know where that leads. Washington Monument stands tall and proud today. I'm thankful that it wasn't finished with a bunch of commercials from long ago etched on the slabs from every Rotary Club or civic organization. It's just a finished and beautiful monument. And in the end, in a very subtle way, that sort of reminds me that what matters most is not the monument we build to our own pride or our own sense of deserving, but the one that Christ builds with our broken gifts and our occasional gratitude and his salvaged love. Because here's the truth. The gospel is the story of how Jesus is the one who goes into the river and brings the stone back for us. Jesus retrieved what we lost. He does it every day, bringing back what we threw out. And we can just honor Jesus. That is the best response. The love of Jesus is the real monument. So let us pray. Gracious God, we're thankful. We're grateful. We don't get there often enough, but when we stop and think about it, we're grateful. So in these days and these weeks ahead, help us to remember what we're grateful for and the beautiful things that we can do in our own lives to respond to your great gift. Amen.